Of course, of course.
Okay, right. Okay, can you see the slides?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes,
okay,
yes,
okay.
sir. Yes.
Okay, dear teachers, today I am going to lecture on the topic conservation in the era of climate change, the role of youth. And in this, I primarily discuss, the ongoing struggles and strikes throughout the world. And I shall start with Greta Thunberg, a Swedish schoolgirl who actually initiated the global strike, and this is the global climate strike. And then it is now receiving global attention, and Greta Thunberg is actually in the limelight and one of the influential persons globally now. And also, the way in which these young boys and girls throughout the world are attracted towards the idea and philosophy forwarded by Greta is something worth noticing. And her strike is now global, and it is taken up by a large number of people. And the only demand is that the youngsters throughout the world, the youth throughout the world, they demand a better place to live. And also they are actually demanding for their rights, and their right for a better planet, their right for a better environment to live. And as senior citizens, many of us and many of the world leaders are responsible for all these kind of changes that the planet is now facing in the form of climate change. And that is the reason why the youngsters are much concerned, because they demand a better place to live, and they demand that they should be heard, and they demand the political leaders that it is the time to take action to save the planet from the ongoing impacts of the climate change. Okay, and that is the reason why the Friday for Future, the global strike initiated by Greta, is from Sweden, is now carried to different parts of the world, and then they are all getting this kind of a support, global support, primarily because the climate change has become a global issue to reckon with, and also an issue which we have to consider, particularly when we look at the future of the youngsters in the world, for the next generation of people. And that is the reason why, if you look at the BBC's list of the most influential women in the world, and you can see one of them is a climate a person involved with climate change and climate education. And this I am not naming any, but if you look at the person who are actually among the athletes and among the other famous people, and then you can see that the people who are all working for nature has now a prominent role to play in the society, because they are now heard by the public as well. So the people who are initiating climate strike, the people who are actually speaking for climate, they are getting global attention in the recent past. And that is the reason why they demand the better future. Okay, and if you look at the number of climate change related cases throughout the world, and now they are on the increase. Okay, and a large number of petitions are filed throughout the world, especially by the younger people, demanding a better place to live. And that is the reason why the political leaders are under a lot of pressure, mainly to have some kind of mitigation and adaptation programs specifically for each country. And if that kind of a momentum is there, that kind of a demand for a better planet is there, I am sure that the things are going to change in future. And that is the reason why I am a bit optimistic about the future of the planet, because youngsters are carrying this in their shoulders. Okay, and then when we discuss generally about the conservation, when we discuss generally about environmental protection, and now the easiest way, especially for the educators, because I'm talking to a group of teachers who will be training the next generation teachers. So the generalistic tendency is that when you are asked to name some environmental issues, The simple way is to start with plastic. Okay, what is a serious issue in the world? You say that it is plastic. Okay, but if you go with the science, and there are, there are some serious issues. And if you look at, this is a recent study by some of the the influential scientists in the world, and they say that if you look planet as a whole, the major issue facing the planet is actually the biodiversity loss. The biodiversity is lost at a very rampant pace, and that is one of the serious problem facing the planet now. And next is that, the global nitrogen cycle is actually now tampered with a lot of influx or inflow of nitrogen into the environmental systems. Okay, and then you can see the third issue is climate crisis. Okay, climate crisis. So if you prioritize the issues which the planet face now, you have to start with the biodiversity loss, and then the way in which the chemical composition of the ecosystems are changed by the anthropogenic interventions, and third is a climate crisis. So you prioritize that. So biodiversity and climate are one of the most important things to discuss, especially in a global scenario when we think about environment, when we think about the future of the planet. And that is the reason why we have a topic now as the conservation and climate. Okay. And before we go into the details of all these things, let me show you some of the photographs from throughout the world. One of the major reasons for climate change, as you are all aware, the greenhouse gases which are emitted into the atmosphere. And these are all starting with the carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and chlorofluorocarbons, and some amount of ozone also. And all these things ultimately reach the outer, the atmosphere, and form a blanket over the planet, and it heats up the planet. And that phenomenon is often referred to as global warming. And global warming, when the planet is warmed, and it will trigger a series of other events or side events which we call which include climate change. Okay, so global warming ultimately result in climate change, and when the climate changes, it trigger again a cascading changes which follow from in different parts of the world, some of them which we will discuss now. And then when you look at the environmental issues facing the planet in a global scale, we have to start with the climate change. Already I told you the climate is changing, and every change is now visible in each and every part of this country. And you start with Rajasthan, then they have the dust storms. Dust storms originate primarily because the earth loses the green cover over it, and then this is a common phenomena throughout the world. And this is one of the indication for desertification, and that is now under change. And you can see that not only in the polar region, in elsewhere also, the climate is changing, the glaciers are melting, and it results in a large number of casualties with regard to biodiversity. And another issue is the rampant mining in different parts of the world, and the huge amount of the waste or the solid waste which we create when we develop. Okay, and so now the major part, my presentation is now divided into three parts. One, what are the threats to the biodiversity, and what are the implications of climate change on the biodiversity, then what are the conservation challenges, and why as educators, as teachers, when we can pass the message on to the next generation. Okay, now when you look at the three major reports, now I draw your attention to three reports. It may not be available in the form of textbooks, but these are all downloadable documents in internet. And the most important report with regard to biodiversity is the Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, which was published in 2019. And then 2020, we have seen the release of a document called Living Planet Report by WWF, or Worldwide Fund for Nature. And if you come to India, the Center for Science and Environment in New Delhi every year publishes State of India's Environment Report. And I'll be touching some of the salient features in these three reports in my presentation. And let me start with the IPBES report. Okay, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And this is actually a platform of large number of scientists across the world. And they came up with the biodiversity report in 2019. And some of the salient features are, one, the 3/4 of the land-based environment and about 66% of the marine environment have been significantly altered by human actions. Okay, and this is the first part. And then it also sees that most of the 1/3 of the world's land surface and nearly 75% of the freshwater resources are now devoted to crop or livestock production. Okay, that means major part of the freshwater available in the world are now used for agriculture as well as livestock production. Okay, that means humans have lesser amount of water available, and when you look at the future also, and land degradation, and 23% of the global land surface are degraded. Okay, and also the urban areas have more than doubled since 1992, and almost 1 million species are threatened with extinction. And all over the world, pollinators are on the decline, and that will actually threaten the food security. So these are some of the alarming points mentioned in this report. And then what are the driving forces? What are the direct drivers? And if you look at the direct drivers, you can see that land use changes, that means the habitat degradation, and the direct exploitation or overexploitation. We can say climate change is the third element when you prioritize the important changes or important drivers that contribute to the biodiversity loss, and pollution, invasive alien species, and other reasons. Okay, if you look at the impacts, or if you prioritize the impacts, then you can understand that it starts with the habitat degradation or land changes or sea use changes, and then direct exploitation and the climate change. These are the three major factors which they impact the biodiversity or the living beings in the planet. In addition to that, there are some indirect drivers, for example, demographic and socio-cultural changes, economic and technological changes, institutions and governance, and the conflicts and epidemics which we are now facing. So these are some of the indirect drivers for the biodiversity loss or the ecosystem changes. And then when you look at the current global extinction risk in different species groups, and we can say that if you look at the IUCN Red List category, and we can see that there are some categories which are in fact to be considered when we look at conservation. That means these are the three categories, for example, vulnerable, endangered, and critically endangered species. Okay, and if you look at their number in different groups or different taxa of organism, you can see the most important one is the cycads. Okay, the cycas for the botanists, and you can see that these are one of the organisms which plant groups which started or evolved along with dinosaurs and much before that, and then it is still continuing to live in the planet. They are living fossils. And second group is the amphibians, including the frogs, and then the dicots, conifers, and the corals, and then other group of organisms. So the most important impacted groups are cycads, amphibians, some of the dicots, conifers, corals, sharks and rays, and crustaceans. And you can see that majority of them are directly consumed by humans, or they are all impacted by the anthropogenic activities. Okay, and then number of species on the brink of extinction. And then you can see that the major groups are mammals 1.4%, birds 3.2%, reptiles 0.6%, amphibia 1%, and total 1.7% of organisms. Okay, and more than 31,000 species are facing or threatened with the extinction. So this is the status globally, and there are if you look at India, the fauna, there are 889 species which are in the threatened category, and if you look at plants, there are 438 species. So this is the status for India. And then when you closely analyze the second report, the Living Planet Report 2020, and if you look at the interesting fact, and the wildlife population throughout the world, they are declining. Okay, that means by 2050, if you are not taking any specific action, and then the loss will be the dramatic and catastrophic in some cases. And that means this is actually the period in which the human beings, as knowledgeable citizens, should intervene. So this is a very critical. That means we are in the entire history of human civilization, we are going through a stage where the intervention, purposeful intervention by the human species, are required to restore or recover the biodiversity back. Okay, that is the essence of this report. And then very interestingly, there are a large number of drivers which are contributing, which are increasing the pressure, and the drivers are consumption pattern. That means for example, every person in the developing country wanted to be a country like America in terms of consumption, and then that is the end of the planet, because the consumption pattern, that means you are not supposed to consume everything which is available in nature, because that will be the end of nature, because we have large number of population in the planet. Then second is agricultural production. In order to enhance production, we are actually tampering the earth, and that is another issue. Then market. The market is putting a lot of pressure on that, because what you buy from the shops is ultimately decided by the market now. That is a period, especially when you look at artificial intelligence and online marketing, and actually what is available in the market only you can buy. Okay, so the market is another factor, finance is another factor, and the governance is another factor, which actually put a lot of pressure. And the pressure is there in the agricultural system, forestry, fishing, and energy and transportation, mining, infrastructure, etc. And if you look at the threats, already I discussed what are the major threats facing the biodiversity or the threats for conservation. You can see that habitat destruction, including degradation, and then overexploitation, climate change, pollution, invasive alien species. Okay, all these things basically put the species and ecosystem under a lot of pressure, especially the biodiversity in these systems. And that will ultimately impact the provisioning services, okay, the regulating services, the supporting services, and the cultural services. And all these things together are known as the ecosystem services offered by both biodiversity and ecosystem. So that means these kind of pressures are all cascading, and ultimately
Sir.
Not audible, sir.
Sir. Not audible, sir. I think sir has some network problem.
hello.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
I think it is got disconnected in between. Let me share it once again.
Okay, sir.
Can you see?
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Okay, okay. So I started discussing about the COVID and COVID scenario. And if you look at the COVID scenario, you should understand that the COVID or the coronavirus is only one among the most notorious viruses that can be transmitted to human beings, or we can say it is the zoonotic disease. And the researchers identified 335 diseases that emerged between 1960 and 2004, and at least 60% of which came from animals. And this the meat trade, which is happening across the world, in fact intensified the spread of diseases. Okay, and that is the reason why now the entire the people, the conservation people, speak about One Health approach. One Health approach means you cannot actually have a separate health conservation scenario for only the human beings. You should take into account the health of the human being, health of the animals, health of the plants, and health of the ecosystem. And that is called One Health approach. And a new discipline called planetary health is emerging that focuses on increasingly visible connections between the well-being of humans and other living things and the entire ecosystems. Okay, and then if you look at the reasons why we have this kind of a scenario now currently, the COVID, and we can see that it is primarily because of the increase in the trade of animals. And that means we have actually year after year, we are closing the gap between the human beings and the wild animals. And that means there is a large number of large areas undergoing deforestation or habitat degradation, and that is the reason why these animals are now close to human beings. And second, we are intensifying culture of these organisms, including the poultry, livestock farming, and everything is in human settlements, near the human settlements, and that also increases the jumping of viruses from the human population, from the animal populations to humans. Okay, and then we are changing that happened in China, because the feeding habit is entirely different, and this was not the case earlier, and that is the reason why if you look at this advertisement, which clearly says that once human beings actually selected only certain organism as the food material. Now they use everything, including the bats, including the scaly anteater, or whatever may be the reservoir host for these viruses. That means it is our interventions in nature, and it is our manipulation of our lifestyle as well as gastronomic requirements. All these contributed ultimately to the pandemics also. So that means it's also our own contribution. Coming back specifically to the issue of climate change, and the climate change report 2021 on the physical science basis is out a few months back. And if you go through this report, IPCC is nothing but the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and this IPCC report very clearly says that there are some changes to reckon with. And this is actually, IPCC never do any kind of direct research. They actually compile the information and they give it to the governments in order to make appropriate policies to fight climate change. Okay, and the latest report very clearly says that the climate change is a real issue, and it has to be taken very seriously, primarily because the human beings are responsible for that. Now the report very categorically say the human interventions are the primary reason for this kind of climatic changes. And if you look at the salient features of IPCC report, and it clearly says that human-induced climate change is already affecting many weather and climate extremes in every region across the world. And that is the reason why we see flash floods and the extreme climatic events like intense rain in some part of India and drought in some other part of India. So all these things have connectivity with the changing climate. And also the scientists are now also observing changes across the entire the Earth climatic system, the atmosphere, the oceans, the ice, and the land. Okay, so the changes are there everywhere, and the sea level is changing, and it is inundating the low-lying areas across the world. And that is the reason why the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres very clearly says that this report is actually a code red for humanity. The alarm bells are deafening, and the evidence is irrefutable. That means for the first time in the history of IPCC, the report categorically say that there are going to be a very strong impact of climate change in the years to come. And if you look at the future, the Paris Agreement and the upcoming the CEO Conference of Parties, and very clearly says that our mandate means the mandate of the humanity is to keep the temperature at 1.5 degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial level. Otherwise, there will be a lot of other changes which will happen. I will spell out some of the changes, and these changes are very well reflected in the report. I request those who are interested to go through the report. It's a very in-depth report. I'll tell you only the basic things. And if you look at the global mean sea level temperature compared to 1900, okay, global mean sea level has risen faster since 1900 than over the preceding century, at least at the last 3,000 years. That means it is categorically emphasized that the sea level has increased globally, and the increase is 0.20 meter between 1901 and 2018, and the average rate of sea level rise was 1.3 millimeter per year between 1901 and 1971, and the increase further, it is 3.71 between 2006 and 2018. So that means that sea level is increasing, and that will put a lot of pressure on the ecosystem. And as you can see, there is those who are interested can again go to a website called sealevel.nasa.gov. And this is actually a website maintained by NASA in order to make the people aware that what is happening to the sea level. And if you specifically look at some of the Indian, the coastal areas, and you can very well study, you can also give it as a project, what is happening with the sea level across the world. And that clearly shows that, if, for example, you look at Chennai, and Chennai, there is a possibility of increase in the sea level by the end of this century by 0.57 meter. Okay. And if you look at Mumbai, it is 0.58. And if you look at the Cochin in Kerala, it is 11 millimeter per year annually. Okay, so all these things indicate that, so Cochin has something more to worry, primarily because already Cochin and nearby Alleppey district are below the sea level, and any kind of sea level rise may further inundate many of flood many of the areas, especially when you look into the sea erosion happening in these states, in the coastal states of India. And then if you look at the possibility of carbon dioxide emission, carbon dioxide is one of the major gases in the atmosphere now, and major reason is definitely fossil fuel burning and other human activities. And then if you look at the possibility when you compare with the historical data, you can see that the major amount of carbon dioxide was absorbed by oceans, and especially the plant communities or the phytoplankton communities in the ocean, and also the plants in the land area. And ocean was the major sink, not only for carbon dioxide, but also for heat. So heat budget of the planet is maintained by the oceans. And once the heat increases, the ocean absorbs more heat and up to a threshold limit. And that also help in expanding the volume. So the increase in sea level is not merely because of the melting of the ice, but also because of the expansion of the volume, thermal expansion of the ocean. That also you should understand. That means if the current carbon dioxide emission scenario continues for long, and then it will saturate the atmosphere, and that means it will saturate the entire planet, and the cumulative anthropogenic carbon dioxide emissions will be disastrous, because that will trigger global warming considerably. That is another indication. And so all the scenarios, these are all modeling projections, and all these modeling projections project the enhancement of carbon dioxide emissions in future as well, by the end of the century, as well as it will be carried forward. Okay, and that will actually impact the weather and climate extremes. That will trigger climate extremes. And already there are cold extremes and hot extremes. For example, some of these Indian states, including Rajasthan and Gujarat, which was hot earlier, now they are experiencing cold extremes. That means when there is a colder scenario in the winter season, and then there will be much more colder, and when there is heat, and it will be more hotter. And hot extremes and cold extremes are projected, and marine heat waves are projected as a result of climate change. Already we have seen the beginning of all these changes, and there is possibility of extreme events. And these extreme events happen when there is more heating of the atmosphere, and that will help in thermal expansion from ocean warming, and then ocean heat waves will result. Already we have indication in India presence of ocean heat waves. Okay. And possible climatic futures, if you look at the possible climatic futures, and all these ultimately will enhance the temperature of the world. And the global leaders are now, with the Paris Agreement, trying to keep it below 1.5 degrees centigrade, and it may go up to 2 degrees centigrade. That's all the projection now believe. And yet the trial or the consistent effort of the humanity is to keep it below or within the range of 1.5 degrees centigrade. Okay. And India is most vulnerable to climate change. The reasons are very simple. Because India is a tropical country, and the projections towards the end of the century also clearly indicate that the carbon dioxide concentration is going to increase because of our own activity or global changes. And India is vulnerable primarily because of the reason that the economy of India is strongly dependent on climate sensitive sectors like agriculture, forestry, fisheries. So these are the things which provide the income for the people, and definitely this will change. And if you look at the biodiversity per se, then you can see that we have the 4 biodiversity hotspots in India: the Western Ghats and Sri Lanka, the Himalayas, the Indo-Burma, and the Sundaland in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So they are all rich in biodiversity and rich in endemic species. That is the reason why they are hotspots, and that will impact the biodiversity considerably. And India has a very unique position because India has only 2.4% of the global land area, but our biodiversity may be 7 to 8% of the global biodiversity. So that means even though the land area is less, we have huge biodiversity, primarily because India has a very peculiar, very unique geographical position, because our fauna came from Afrotropican elements, Indo-Malayan and Paleo-Arctic, and that is the reason why we have a huge biodiversity in India. And so far, the globe has seen, or the planet has seen, 5 major extinctions. And what is now going on at a rampant pace is referred to as the Holocene extinction or the 6th mass extinction. And we have studied that 5 extinctions in the globe in the history of Earth. And last one saw the extinction of dinosaurs from the planet Earth. And the ongoing extinction of species, which is much faster than the ancient past, is referred to as Holocene extinction or 6th mass extinction. This is also referred to as anthropogenic extinction. So our effort should be to reduce this anthropogenic extinction, which is believed to be 100 to 1,000 times faster than the geological extinctions. Okay, and as this graph shows, in the entire history of the planet, the species loss, biodiversity loss, is at its peak in the recent past, especially in the last 100 years' time, mainly because of anthropogenic activities. And we have seen some of the typical examples, which you have all teaching students. We start with the typical example of dodo. Gone in the way of dodo is the phrase. And then you can see that this species became extinct right from the day in which the human beings, settled or in Mauritius Island in Indian Ocean. Okay, that is a typical the case of extinction of one species from the planet. And there is an interesting story of passenger pigeon, which was once the most abundant bird in the planet. And in 50 years' time, nothing is left. Nothing is left. And then we actually, because of overpoaching only, overexploitation only, they became extinct. We have examples in India also. Cheetah, typical example. It was an animal which was abundant in many parts of India, mainly because of poaching by the hunters and the emperors in India. It became extinct. And the word cheetah came from Chitraka, a Sanskrit word, which means it has a spectacle mark near the eye. And the Asian cheetah population is also no more. Only a smaller population lives somewhere in Iran. That is all. All the rest of the Asian cheetah is totally gone. And now we have a population in Africa, as well as that is an African population, but we have Asian population only in some part of Iran, which is not at all a good place for this organism to survive for long. And now the Indian government is trying to, the clone cheetah and release them back to the environment. But the issue is that the habitat is lost, because these cheetah never live in dense forest, and they live only in, the open grasslands, as kind of savanna region. And that is no more available in larger quantities in India when you look at conservation of the species. And when we say about extinction, we can say that there are typical example of extinction globally. The species which is no more in the globe, typical example is passenger pigeon. And there are extinction within the country. For example, cheetah, it is there, Asian cheetah in Iran, but it is not in India. So it is extinct from India. So this species is extinct globally. And then there are local extinctions. For example, if you look at saltwater crocodile, it is there in some part of Odisha and part of northeastern India, but not in Kerala. So it is locally extinct in Kerala. So all these classification systems you should understand. Okay. So we discussed the issue with the biodiversity loss, the reasons for biodiversity loss. And then I specifically come to the impact of the climate change on the biodiversity or conservation in general. And the projected estimates of temperature increase in India up to 4 degrees centigrade by 2050 clearly indicates that this is going to have its impact on the climate. Okay, climatic regimes, primarily because the monsoon, the pattern, with which the Indian economy, the agricultural economy flourished, and that is now changing. Already it's changing, and monsoon rainfall will change, and the pattern of rain will change. And the agriculture in India is actually in tune with the climate vagaries, because the Indian agriculture, the farmers, they have their own cycle of farming. It is all in tune with the monsoon, and if there is change in monsoon, that will impact the entire the agricultural production. Okay, so what are the projected impact on the Indian agriculture? If you should understand that increase in the fertilizer requirement is one issue, and that will change the the environmental quality as well. And then increase in the sea level and river water temperature is likely to impact fish breeding, migration, and harvest. All are economic sectors. And increase the water, shelter, and energy requirement for livestock. They have implications on the milk production. That means in every sector of agriculture there will be impact. Okay, and the challenge is actually for India is to enhance fish production, because India is one of the highly populous countries in the world. So our primary challenge is now to enhance fish production. And you might have read about the hunger index, which is published internationally. India is one of the lowest countries, okay, as far as hunger index is concerned. So we have to better our position, and at the same time, there is an issue of climate change. So we have two challenges. One is to increase the fish food production, and second, we have to face the climate change. Then that is actually a challenge, and also we have to contribute to the the carbon system. We have to adjust with the carbon emission systems as well. And if you look at fisheries, the implications are much more. If it has the implications on the species distribution, socioeconomics, as well as the cultural scenario in the coastal environment. And for example, the most important marine fish in India in terms of quantity is the oil sardine, the Sardinella longiceps. And then now the population in the last few years have declined considerably. And the reason is that there is not toward a migration of this species, primarily because of the increase in sea surface temperature. And in addition, there are issues with the oxygen minimum zones at many parts of Indian Ocean, and of course the pressure on the juvenile fishing as well. So the impact will be much more. And there will be impact on the critical ecosystems in ocean, like the seaweeds and seagrasses, and critical species like turtles, where the development of the animal is in tune with the temperature in the atmosphere. For example, if you look at the most numerous animal turtles in India, that is olive ridley. Typical breeding ground is Odisha coast. And then the olive ridley turtles, the egg hatches out, and the temperature of the atmosphere and the time of hatching determine the sex of the organisms. So it's a very, very intriguing question, and not answered by scientists, how the temperature determines the sex of the organism. So for this animal, if the temperature increases, there is every chance that there will be more female population, and then that will skew the entire population ratio of these organisms. So there are a large number of issues. I'm not discussing everything because that's an entirely different topic. And that the globally 40% of the marine fish production comes from the coral reef areas, which will be less than 3% of the sea. Okay, and the reason why coral reefs are beautiful is primarily because they have a symbiotic association with an algae, and that algae is called zooxanthellae. Now some species are also called Symbodinium. And once the temperature increases, the algae leave the coral. Okay, and as a result, the corals appear white in color, and this phenomenon is often referred to as coral bleaching. And coral bleaching is severely impact the ocean productivity, because coral reefs are referred to as the rainforest of the ocean. Okay, so this is a rampant phenomenon now because of global warming. The bleaching phenomena increases globally, including in Lakshadweep and Andaman and Nicobar Islands, which are coral areas in India. And that is the reason why globally there is impact of biodiversity in multiple fronts, and climate change is one of the major contributor, in addition to the habitat degradation and pollution. And then we can say that that is the reason why globally there is a realization of conserving biodiversity, and that is why 2010 was celebrated as the International Year of Biodiversity. And the United Nations has actually set in a goal to reduce biodiversity loss, and that was not achieved. Okay, that was not achieved. 2020, then they came forward with another target called H target, which has to be achieved by 2020. And then because of pandemic and other scenarios, economic scenarios, that was also not met. And 2011 and to 2020 was United Nations decade on biodiversity, in order to set in the goals to reduce biodiversity and to conserve biodiversity globally. And now I told you we are at a tipping point. We need to do something for conserving the existing biodiversity, and also to change the see that the impact will be reduced for future. And we all live with a hope that the better days are to come. Ache din aane wale hain is a motto by the governments, but we have to really see whether the better days are coming in terms of sustainability and sustainable development. And the reason is very simple, because this is the rate in which the Indian populations grow. By in the next 25 years, we will be the #1 in terms of global population, and every second a new Indian is born. And that means, compared to any other country in the world, it's our responsibility to see that the resources are kept intact, because we have a larger number of mouths to feed compared to other countries in the world. So it's a challenging scenario for India, and the population pressure will be there on the every ecosystem service and every natural resource available in the country. So there are a large number of thinking, philosophical thinking globally to conserve nature as such. Okay. And those who are teaching environmental education should actually mention this lady who initiated this kind of an environmental thinking, green philosophy in the minds of people globally. And that is Rachel Carson. And Rachel Carson was basically a marine biologist, and then she wrote a very classical book, and that is that book probably every I should say every college in this country should buy, Silent Spring. And Silent Spring tells you a story about DDT and what and the implications of DDT on the species as well as human beings. And when she published it in 1960s, and there was a lot of oppositions. Okay, and even the American government was against that, and they said that it was a story. It was actually a created story. It was a fantasy, and many scientists were against it. And the government appointed a committee to study what was actually wrong with the DDT. And the scientific committee also came up with the report that DDT is a potent poison, and that shows all the biomagnification impacts, and it will be carried to human species easily through the food grains, through the meat they consume, etc., etc. So her book actually kindled interest in many parts of the world, and that book was translated into different languages across the world. And then the people started discussing about the implications of development and the environmental changes on human beings and their survival. And that is the reason why the scientists across the world, they sat together, formed an association, and that is called Club of Rome. And Club of Rome also, it was actually an association of the genius people across the world, and they came up with a report called Limits to Growth in 1972. It clearly shows the relationship between the human population growth and the availability of resources. And they published this document called the Limits to Growth, which of course question the population growth and the availability of natural resources. Okay, and that also became a hot point of discussion, and that is the reason why United Nations in 1972 they organized a meeting, the first meeting of first intergovernmental meeting to discuss the human development and human environment. And that meeting is called the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment. It happened in Stockholm, and the agreement came in June 5th, and that is the reason why we have Environment Day celebration on June 5th. And then the Prime Minister of India, the then Prime Minister of India, Indira Gandhi, made an astonishing speech in this meeting. Only few world leaders attended that meeting, and she related poverty with development. Okay, that became a hot topic of discussion. And when there is an issue of poverty, people depend upon the natural resources considerably. And then the issue is actually the entirely different philosophical argument of development between North and South. It's entirely different scenario. And then came a lot of reports how the resource availability will impact, resource depletion will impact the human population, and it was connected with food security. And then a lot of other hypotheses were also forwarded. And then the United Nations appointed a committee headed by Gro Harlem Brundtland. She was the Prime Minister of Norway at that period of time. And she came out with a report that's called Our Common Future. Our Common Future is a report. And for the first time, the concept of sustainable development was defined there. And the development that meets the need of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. And that is the reason why sustainable development became a hot topic of discussion internationally. And the way in which the human beings develop at present is not actually a better strategy for a better planet tomorrow. And that is the reason why this is now a hot topic of discussion. So sustainable development per se, remains with the three pillars. And one is environment, second is economy, and third is society. So that means when you ultimately wanted to see sustainable development to happen, and then there should be environmental conservation, economic security, and social well-being. And these are the things. And in order to understand this concept, we need to strengthen education. And that is the reason why United Nations has a specific focus now on education for sustainable development. And they have a decade for that. And large number of packages are coming up. And that means I'm speaking to a group of the teachers who train the students to become teachers. And this topic, irrespective of what you teach, if it's a language, science, doesn't matter, but the sustainability element should be there, because this is a concept that has to be incorporated into the curriculum in order to live in a better world. Okay, so all these capitals, social, environmental, and economic, are addressed in this scenario. And if you look at future 2030, United Nations has actually forwarded a set of sustainable development goals. And if you look at the sustainable development goals, it starts with no poverty and zero hunger. No poverty and zero hunger are priorities. If you wanted to see a government developed, and then it should be free of poverty, and the hunger should not be an issue. And you can examine all these 14, all these 17 goals, and majority of them are connected with the living systems and biodiversity. Okay, that means if you it was not an earlier concept was not like this is only for development, but now we can see that if the environment is not protected, and then you cannot actually attain development, because it is connected with the biodiversity, the ecosystem. Everything is connected with food security, nutritional security, health of the environment, health of the well-being of the people ultimately. And so that is the reason why, if you look at environment, society, and economy, all these developmental goals are directly or indirectly linked together. So that means if you wanted to see development, and then environmental protection, biodiversity conservation has a specific role. Okay, then look at Indian scenario. By 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals and how India is progressing. India has scored overall mark of 60 only. And in Sustainable Development Goals, Indian performance is rather poor. And look at the areas where Indian performance is bad. Okay, and then if you can see the scenario where we scored less than 30, one is hunger. And hunger is still a major issue in India. Okay, and the largest number of hungry people live in this country, not in Africa. Okay, remember, because we have a huge population. And then a poverty issue we have to address, the education issue we have to address. See, there are some areas where we made progress. For example, you look at clean water and sanitation. Because of the government's continuous effort, that has increased. We have 88 marks, the maximum marks which we scored. And biodiversity conservation, no much action. And climate change also, our performance is rather medium. So, and at the same time, we look at Kerala, which is number one in terms of achieving sustainable development goals. And what the strength of Kerala, you look at the education. Look at the health management scenario here, and the performance is much better. And that is the reason why our score is more than 70. But there are areas where we are weak. Look at the conservation of the life below water, or aquatic biodiversity, terrestrial biodiversity, climate action. Our point is basically less. So these are the areas where the government, the Kerala government has to actually focus our attention, even though the performance in other sectors was better. Okay, And then very interestingly, if you look at the states in India where the population control is weak, okay, and then it can be slightly connected with the education of the girls, okay, education of the girl students. And that means literacy has something to do with the population control as well. So this is an area where India has to focus, make the people educated, and there should be population control because we have lesser amount of resources available, land available in this country. Our consumption pattern should be sustainable. That means in the curriculum, in the planning, in the planning process, we have to bring in the idea of how better or sustainably we can utilize the resources for future. And that is the reason why we cannot actually propagate the international ideas, because there are some fundamental things which we have to correct here. For example, this is a village pond in Rajasthan. Only one pond available, for example, in a classical case. And what will the people do? They will not speak about the caste, creed, etc. They will not say, I am the Brahmin, you are the the backward class, nothing, no talk there, and they speak only about the common resource available there. So the community will try to partition the resource, or equally distribute the resource among themselves, because this is an issue of survival. And ultimately, if the resource is available in lesser quantity, then people think about or speak about how better we can share the resources equitably. And that is why the foolish argument of in the name of religion and caste going on in India is ultimately bullshit. And then what we need to think about is growing population in the country, how better we can stabilize the the environment and climate, how better we can sustain the biodiversity available in the country, how better we can educate the students to in a different manner, so that you impart skill for them to survive in the planet. This should be the priority of the government, rather than speaking religion, politics, and all the and blah blah blah. Okay. And then the COVID actually has shown us a way out, because even a small virus which comes from the unknown animal, the so unknown within quotations, can actually stop the world from movement, and it will destabilize the economy of the nations. So this is one way in which we can realize the actual scenario of the world and understand that the environmental conservation is one of the major things which we have to address. Okay, I'm not discussing every strategy. We also have to change our economy so that this is called circular economy. Circular economy produces lesser amount of waste. So every byproduct is actually used sustainably, so that ultimately zero waste is there in this concept. So we have a long way to go. Coming back to the final part of my talk, what is the role of youth? Very simple, because it is our responsibility, the responsibility of the senior citizens, to give the earth back to the future generation as better they can. Because they also have the right to enjoy the same kind of provisions which you enjoyed, in the form of free air, good water, and good environment. And that is the reason why the youth play a very, very important role. And in a country like India, we have the largest percentage of youth in the world. Okay, so that means young people and future generations will be the worst affected by this change, because they are not living in a pristine environment where most of us lived. We only polluted the environment like this, and it's our contribution to the next generation. So the changes should actually happen now. And that is the reason why the youth are very critical. And then youth, and we often complain that the younger generation are moving with mobile, and then they use modern technology. They don't care for the relationships, etc., etc. But there is you cannot actually go back. You cannot actually walk back in the history of human development. And what we can do is give them responsibility. And whenever there is actually a sense of responsibility, the youngsters have shown it. They have shown it in many instances. They have shown it, and it's only that they should realize the impact. And that is the reason why the people are in the forefront of environmental movements, the youngsters throughout the world, primarily because they realize that the earth is changing, and it's their responsibility to see that the systems function in a normal way. And then the large number of people come up with a lot of innovations, maybe in social media, or maybe with the specific society-oriented programs. They're all coming up. And there are a large number of innovations happening. They are making better machines in a new scenario. They are making good products, which will sell in the new world, which will cut emissions or carbon dioxide emissions. And they are trying to make innovative projects for saving the environment, reducing carbon footprint. And those who are interested can go and look at the innovations practices or generation restoration program with a challenge going on. And then what are the the youth initiatives to restore the earth back? Large number of activities are going on across the world. I am not reading it out. If you go, there are a large number of initiatives, global initiatives, where the youngsters come up with the novel solutions. For example, there are solutions to make process the food materials with the solar energy, and they are coming up with the technology to reduce carbon footprint. And there are technologies to save the Amazon forest and salt water, how to make fresh water from the salt water, less cost, less energy input devices. So then tree economy, global garden initiatives. So the youngsters are coming up with new ideas. The problem with the older people like us is that after a particular time, there is a limitation of idea, and that is the reason why I always recommend or ask or inspire my students to join politics also. Some of the brilliant people should join politics, so because the older generation, after a particular year, the older the Buddha people cannot deliver anything for the future generation. They think only about their generation, because the future generation is somebody who has to live in this planet and take care of the planet. And there are a large number of youth activists around the world. You can see them, you can list them, and you can study what basically they do. And these should actually inspire people. They're all brilliant students, maybe in colleges, in schools, and they take up the activity of environmental conservation, climate mitigation as one of the major agendas in their movement. And they are there in USA, they are there in, they are black, they are white, they are brown people across the world, irrespective of caste and creed and color. And they come up with a common idea to discuss about the climate change and how to mitigate climate scenario. And in Germany, and also there are a large number of movements and associations which actually take up this challenge. For example, you look at Action for Climate Empowerment. And this is actually a term adopted by United Nations Framework on Convention on Climate Change to denote work under Article 6 of the Convention and Article 12 of the Paris Agreement. And overarching goal is to empower all members of the society to engage climate action through education, training, public awareness, public participation, public access to information, and international cooperation. And all these things make the climate empowerment. Youngsters play a very, very important role. And throughout the world, the youngsters joined this group, and then they are doing a lot of activities to empower the people or educate the people. And that's the reason why climate education is very, very important in this context. Okay, and the climate emergency is our generation's greatest challenge. Okay, so that is one of the motto of ACE, or the Action for the Climate Emergency Program. And then they demand for sustainable lifestyles, sustainable patterns of consumption and production. And the youngsters lead this kind of activity under UNESCO. And also youth building momentum for climate change. If you look at different activities throughout the world, for example, there is a group called Transforming Food Systems, Youth Innovations for Human and Planetary Health. And they are doing the services to better the planetary health, and also youth engagement in UN climate change program. There are a large number of youngsters from India work with this program in different parts. Large number of youngsters, many of them I know personally because we talk on this issue, and they do a lot of initiatives in this scenario. And for example, this Yango program of they are now very active in the Glasgow, where the Conference of Parties is now going to happen. UN Climate Change Conference is now 2021 is scheduled at Glasgow, and where they are very active. The youth constituency in this group, they called Yango, and they primarily work. There are two leaders globally, Mary Graf and Ahita Lakhani from India, and they work continuously with a very strong focal point in order to conserve this nature and specifically to talk about climate justice. And Young and Future Generations Day is there in the Conference of Parties meeting, where they meet and discuss the ideas and transmit the ideas to the senior citizens who are actually working on this climate agreement. Okay, and also there is global youth video competition where the global youth participate and promote their ideas through the videos. And they have also developed an mobile app called the lifestyle calculator, which ultimately help every person to calculate your own footprint. Okay, how much footprint you create based on a series of questionnaire, and how much is your footprint when you live in the world. And that is the lifestyle calculator. And the UNESCO Climate Action Network is there. Okay, and this is called UCAN. UCAN is again another movement called the Youth UNESCO Climate Action Network. Large number of people, including from India, is there in this network, and primarily they network with the similar-minded people across the world, and then primarily work with education. As you know, the primary motto of UNESCO is education and networking, and these groups called UCAN, they basically work with this motto. And then there is also a group called the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, very active with a lot of participants from India, and they organize conferences, they network, they share ideas, and then bring out, make lobbying, very active in the social media to share the ideas and work for a better planet. And then they organize meetings as well. And IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, they organize Youth Summit. The Youth Summit this year is just over, and very, very proactive group. And this year the topic was relationship between people and nature, climate change, marine and freshwater conservation, technology and innovation, rights, governance, and social justice. So you go through this subject, it will give you a clear idea. It is not focused, it is actually a multidisciplinary subject. And climate change, as you should understand, is a multidisciplinary subject. You should not argue that I am a specialist in life sciences and it is my subject. No, it is applicable to everybody. It's a multidisciplinary subject. It's actually a subject connected with everybody. And every year they select eco heroes globally. Okay. Eco heroes globally, and this year also, if many eco heroes are from America this year. And interestingly, if you go through their names, you understand that many of them are Indians. Okay, they were the persons or the students of Indian origin, and clearly shows that the Indian youth are all in this platform, winning awards for their innovative contributions for protecting biodiversity and working for climate change. Okay. And also there are a large number of reserves which are managed by the youth. And you look at the youth-led biodiversity conservation reserve in some part of Africa, where the youngsters play a very important role, and it's a land trust managed by the youth. So large number of activities. And in Kerala, there is a group of youngsters whom I am also an advisor. It's called Bring Back Green. Youngsters very proactive in they create documentaries, they organize conferences, very well work with the bureaucracy as well in order to make changes. Climate action group. Okay, like that, large number of groups are there. So when you look at the final part of my presentation, next 5 minutes is just tell you that what are the things we can do. So COVID has taught us a lesson that this kind of a development, this kind of an activity, we should stop, and then we have to have a rethinking about the philosophy of life and philosophy of living. And it also demarcated a very clear guidelines as far as developmental process is concerned, paradigms are concerned. And that one is the subsidized universal basic services. What are the universal basic services? Education for all, health for all, and then food for all. Okay, so this is the concept with which the world should actually move. And India has a specific role. Already I told you, 600 million young people in this country. And if you look at them and their employment status, many of them are not employed. So it's our responsibility to see that you have to develop skilling program for them, better environment, stabilize the population, ensure environmental stability, stabilize climate and food production. You have to have a philosophy of sustainable living. It actually started, the whole philosophy of sustainable living started with India, very deep rooted in Indian culture, and revive that, slow down the pace of economic activity and create self-sustaining and interconnected communities. That is what India can do. Now we are seeing the, the march of the farmers in Delhi. Now what a country like India can do is to fight globalization, or somebody else deciding on your future, is to work out small communities, work as small communities where you don't speak about religion, caste, and creed, but you think about the survival, happiness, and better planet, and bring economic and circular and cultural, bring down economic and cultural divide, gender equality, again a topic to discuss for several hours, and happy people and happiness for all. So these are the agendas with which we can work, especially when you think about sustainability. And also, the youngsters, your own students, when they go off, they have lesser chance now to get an employment, because the unemployment is very high. And what they can do is, you recreate the whole syllabus and create more and more skilling opportunities for the students, and give them emotional intelligence. So they should be aware of themselves. Self-awareness, empathy, motivation, all the things should actually go in hand with the educational program, because they should be emotionally intelligent rather than the IQ alone. And that is another challenge for us, especially when you look at the higher education sector in India. And there are large number of alternatives for sustainable development, like the green economy, which is now coming up. And I am not discussing the philosophy of that. That's not meant here. And we have to have a better eco-restoration program involving the communities in the world. And we have to use the traditional knowledge in India in order to combat climate change. And we have a larger population compared to anywhere in the world. Youth, we have to make use of the youth power, not for destructive purposes, but for constructive purposes and the environmental conservation measures. And we now realize that climate change and corona has some linkages. So it is our responsibility to see that how better in the educational curriculum we bring in the whole concept of sustainable living. Okay, and so we should be part of the solution. That is the philosophy there, especially when you think about sustainability and sustainable environmental education or climate education per se. And also we have to actually make out scenarios wherein we can reduce the environmental footprint, or we can also say how better we can reduce the carbon footprint by our own action. This is another way. And there are large number of practices now globally which can be considered as a model, like car-free cities, where the public transportation mechanism and facilities are much better, and India has to try in that direction as well, because we cannot have that much of the vehicles in the road, primarily when you look at the environment and the poor state in which our roads are in. And large number of colleges are now bicycle friendly. If you go to the Indian Institute of Science, one of the best premier institutions in India, we can see that they allow only electric vehicles, and no private vehicle is allowed to move around. You can take an electric vehicle and go, or you can use a bicycle, because there are bicycle parks there, and it is there in many of the universities where I visited. This is becoming a common practice these days. And we have to have a stronger philosophy. Only thing is that ask the students where this question, and does the change start from within? And that means there's more kind of self-awareness should happen, and that is the way in which we can develop and incorporate key values of sustainability in the curriculum, so that the people, whatever subject they learn, they should be aware of this kind of a concept. And also there should be a focal point where the government is also now trying through the educational policy to make the people more happy, rather than a consumeristic way of mad living, how consume less and with a larger cultural rooting and live happily. But there are some issues whereas as far as India is concerned, one of the key elements is reduce the corruption in the public system. And that is something where India has to concentrate. Anyway, I'm not discussing that, beyond the scope of this lecture. And upcoming days are also important. We have 2021-2030 as UN decade on ecosystem restoration. It demands the restoration of the degraded ecosystem that also play a very, very important role in climate mitigation, because trees are one of the or healthy ecosystems are one of the answers to climate change, because sequestration of carbon can be done by the healthy ecosystems. That is why this is very, very important. Okay, thank you. I stop there with this. Thank you for listening, and I am sure that whatever I discussed is primarily to give you a broader idea about what is happening with the biodiversity and how better we can manage the curriculum as well as our efforts to better the whole academic exercise in order to provide a better platform for the younger generation to live in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for an interesting and informative session. Actually, this session is an eye-opener for us. I think this is the real time that we have to make a beginning to protect the nature in a right direction. Now it is a time for asking questions. Participants can ask questions now.
Teacher, one question in the chat box.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
There is one question by GB, which I can see.
Sir,
Yeah.
That is, I will repeat that in order to answer that for the benefit of all the participants. And non-renewable resources are getting depleted fast. World population is alarmingly increasing. And how better we can go for the conservation of nature and natural resources, how it is possible. It is true, along with the natural resources, non-renewable resources are also getting depleted very fast. And then the emergency in front of the mankind is in two fronts, I will say. There are a large number of arguments, a larger and broader question, but one is our responsibility, one of the prime responsibility, considering the limitation of natural and renewable or non-renewable resources, is to stabilize the population. And this is one of the challenges for the mankind, and India has to take a lead and to become a global leader in that. That is one thing. And second is, the most serious challenge is climate change. And for that, you have to stabilize the population as well. So that means we should have a lot of innovative ideas to come in to do agriculture in a limited area, how better we can maximize the production from the unit area, and how we can have ecologically stabilized farming systems, how better we can bring in technology to produce value-added products, and how we can reduce emissions with the help of technology. All these things are happening, and how we can actually increase the green area in the planet so that the remaining carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases are absorbed back by the environment and systems like that. So it's actually a complex thinking, and one of the best thing to start with is definitely to stabilize the population and stabilize the climate.
Any more questions?
Hello, sir. Hello.
Yes.
Yes, sir. You are audible, sir.
Sir, I have a question regarding the last part of your presentation. It's all about the movements, particularly the climate change movements and the movements that participating by the youths in various parts of the world, particularly in the Western world, in USA and European world. Why these kinds of movements are not happening in India? Because we are the worst affected by this kind of climate change issues. And in our political discourse, the green or green politics is not a crucial factor. We are all discussing the kind of caste, communal and religious factors. But nowadays, the Europe and West, the green or green politics is an important political discourse in those areas. But in India, even in our political parties are not took this particular aspect seriously. So why?
I
And how
agree.
can we change that situation?
Yeah, Vivek sir, I agree with you fully. And the reason is very simple. There are movements, there are many issues in India because I have experience with these groups both in India and abroad. But the issue with India is that there are large number of young groups of youngsters. But the problem is that, one, they are not referred. It is not discussed in the political platform or in the media. And have you seen any kind of this discussion on environment except when we have flood and the natural hazards? Anywhere in the media, how much space is left aside by the the leading newspapers in India on discussing this matter, and how many political parties in India carry this green politics as their agenda? All these things are interconnected. And then there are large number of youth organizations actually in India working on these aspects, but they are not heard. And I know many organizations in India where they wanted to work hard, but there's no political support, there's no financial support as well. So all these things are interconnected. There are many things happening in India, but it is not coming as a larger movement. And I am sure that that will happen. That will happen when the resources go scarce. And that is the history of the universe. Wherever the resources go scarce, and then people will speak about that. Now the Indian young generation started speaking about that. They are forming large number of groups, but they are not getting momentum and the social support. And once the society is also aware, and definitely the youngsters will be heard, I am sure. It is not that there is no momentum happening among the youngsters. Even for the Friday for Future, there are the interest in Indian schools as well, the students as well, but it's not picking up the momentum. It will, I am sure. I am optimistic about that. It will, when we have more pressure on the environment, and when there are more discussions on this, and also when we have more education in India. And that is another reason why in many of the regions it's not happening at the grassroots. And once we cross the barrier of 70% literacy as a national average, or we come close to 80%, I'm sure these kind of discussions will happen at the grassroots.
Okay, sir. Okay.
We have to wait for that.
Okay, we are waiting for the better.
Yeah, we have to wait for that. And also in this kind of platforms, we have to expose the ways in which the political priorities are set. It's primarily for discussing the wasteful discussion. You look at the the media discussions right from the the Republic TV to our own local channels. What is happening every day? All bullshit, nonsense, and small matters, and no issues with the social interests. Okay, and that kind of a thing should happen, especially when you look for a knowledge society to take care of the future of India.
You're absolutely right. The media is not taking these kinds of things seriously, even after in Kerala also. Yep. These recent issues of landslide in Kutigal, what all the discussion about that? It's a kind of one side there is some person supporting Gadgil and some are opposing Gadgil, and they are fighting to each other.
Core issues are not discussed. That's the problem.
Core issues are not discussing. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much.
One more question by Anisa Sabir. Yeah, Anisa Sabir, I see that, what is the progress made by Indian government in conservation compared to other countries? Okay, see, there is, we cannot actually compare by percentage, but the thing is that we are making progress, definitely. The India has recently submitted the 5th comprehensive report on biodiversity or on CBD, you can say, Convention on Biological Diversity. That's an international agreement. India has recently submitted the report, and some areas we have made progress. For example, we have increased the protected area. We have increased the. We have launched different conservation programs specifically for certain species. But what is not happening is the targeted conservation movement and environmental conservation movement, and there are a large number of challenges because these are all things which require huge amount of investments. For example, if you wanted to make an area protected, and that need lot of investment by the government. So that kind of investment for conservation is not happening. And government is actually year after year cutting down the finance for all these kind of activities as well, because the priority is primarily development, and it is not actually balanced. So we cannot say conservation area is definitely increasing, but if you look at the number of threatened species in India, year after year, it's increasing. There are programs, there are specific programs, but the pressure is actually created by the larger number of people in the country. A lot of pressure and a lot of the political interventions and a lot of land use changes happening, a lot of conversions happening. All these things are issues which challenge conservation in India.
A request in the chat box to send the PPT to Devir Kumar. His mail ID is also sharing in the chat box.
Yeah, that I can try. Yes.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, time to conclude the session. Thank you very much, sir, for giving a deep insight in the threats and challenges of biodiversity and mitigation measures to be adopted. Youth have both special concerns and special responsibilities in relation to the environment. A number of environmental risks and hazards disproportionately affect young people who have to live for an extended